The day I found myself arranging my late husband's medical awards on a particleboard shelf in what used to be my laundry room, I knew something had profoundly shifted in my family's dynamics. The basement wasn't uncomfortable. Jensen and Tory had installed carpet and a small bathroom when they suggested I move downstairs for safety reasons, but it was still a basement. Standing there, surrounded by 50 years of memories now confined to a space meant for storage and seasonal decorations, I realized I had become just another responsibility they had efficiently tucked away beneath their feet. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My beautiful Victorian home, the one Leo and I had lovingly restored room by room over our 45-year marriage, the one where we'd raised our children and hosted decades of family gatherings, had somehow transformed from my sanctuary into my prison. The creaking floorboards above me marked Tory's impatient pacing, each step a reminder that I was now living beneath their lives rather than within my own. I glanced at the small basement window, barely at ground level, where all I could see were the wheels of Tory's luxury SUV and occasionally the neighborhood children's feet as they raced by. The world had quite literally been reduced to glimpses of life passing me by. The home that Leo and I had built with such care and intention was now a place where I had to ask permission to use the upstairs kitchen or sit in my own garden. The catalyst for my basement relegation had been a simple fall, a minor hip fracture that had healed months ago, yet somehow justified this temporary arrangement that showed no signs of being temporary. "Mom, we're just worried about those stairs," Jensen would say, his concerned expression well practiced. "You need to be on one level, and this makes the most sense for everyone." 3 months had passed since my recovery, yet my suggestions about returning to the master bedroom were consistently deflected with vague concerns about my safety and what's best. Meanwhile, Tory had transformed my bedroom into her home office, my sewing room into a yoga studio, and spoke openly about the renovations they planned for their home during phone calls I wasn't meant to overhear. That morning, something changed within me as I arranged the last of Leo's awards. Perhaps it was remembering how he'd held my hand on his final day and made me promise, "Don't let anyone diminish who you are, Alicia, not even our children." Or perhaps it was simply the indignity of hearing Tory refer to my cherished dining room table, the one where we'd celebrated every family milestone for decades, as that outdated thing we should replace. Whatever the catalyst, I found myself reaching for the small fireproof box I kept hidden behind my knitting supplies. Inside was the folder Leo had prepared during his final months, copies of our will, insurance policies, bank accounts, and most importantly, the deed to the house. The deed that, despite Jensen and Tory's assumptions and casual comments about when the house is theirs, remained solely in my name. Leo had been meticulous about our financial arrangements. "Keep this information close, Alicia," he'd instructed. "Knowledge is protection, and sometimes family can have blind spots when it comes to inheritance." I hadn't fully understood his caution then. Now, running my fingers over the embossed seal on our property documents, his foresight seemed almost prophetic. I heard the telltale sound of the basement door opening, followed by Tory's voice calling down, "Alicia, the contractor is here to measure for built-ins. We need you to move your things from the east wall. Built-ins. In the basement, without consulting me." I carefully returned the documents to their hiding place and took a deep, steadying breath. "I'll be right up," I called back, my voice betraying none of the resolution forming within me. As I climbed the stairs to face yet another change to my home made without my input, I made a decision that would shock everyone, including myself. I would reclaim my house and my dignity, and I wouldn't tell a soul until everything was in place. The contractor, a young man with kind eyes, looked uncomfortable as Tory explained her vision for modernizing this outdated space. "The built-ins will give her more storage," Tory explained, gesturing toward me without actually looking at me. "And we can add some better lighting since it's so depressing down here." "This is Mrs. Reynolds's space?" the contractor asked, glancing at me with a respect Tory hadn't shown in months. "Yes, my mother-in-law is staying down here. It's safer for someone her age," Tory replied smoothly. "Temporarily," I added, meeting Tory's surprised expression with a calm smile. "Very temporarily." If Tory noticed the new resolve in my voice, she gave no indication. She was already pointing out where my bookshelf would need to be relocated to accommodate her plans. I stood silently, nodding at appropriate intervals while my mind calculated the steps needed for what would come next. That evening, after Tory and Jensen had settled in front of their television upstairs and the sound of their program filtered down through the ceiling, I made 2 important phone calls. The first was to Megan, my dear friend who had retired from real estate just last year. "I need to know what my house is worth in today's market," I whispered, "and how quickly it could be sold." The second call was to my old friend Aaron, an attorney who had helped with Leo's estate. "I need to understand my options," I explained quietly, "and I need absolute discretion." As I ended the calls, I felt something I hadn't experienced since before Leo's illness, a sense of purpose and control over my own destiny. The basement walls, which had felt so confining just hours earlier, now seemed like a temporary inconvenience rather than a permanent sentence. I slept soundly that night for the first time in months, lulled by the knowledge that while Jensen and Tory might have my china cabinet and family photographs, I still held the most important piece of paper of all, and they had no idea what I was about to do with it. Long before I found myself sorting through belongings in a basement not truly meant for living, Leo and I had built a life filled with purpose and joy in our beloved Victorian home on Maple Avenue. We purchased the house in 1975, when the neighborhood was still considered up and coming, and the ornate woodwork and stained glass windows had been painted over by previous owners who didn't appreciate their craftsmanship. "It has good bones," Leo had said, squeezing my hand as we stood in the dusty foyer during our first viewing. "We can bring it back to life, room by room," and we did. Weekends were spent stripping layers of paint from intricate crown moldings, researching historically accurate colors, and hunting through salvage yards for period-appropriate fixtures. Leo, ever the skilled surgeon with his precise hands, would painstakingly restore delicate details while I managed the larger restoration projects. Every doorknob, every floorboard, every window held our shared history within it. By the time Jensen was born in 1979, we had transformed the main floor and created a warm nursery in what would become his childhood bedroom. As our family grew with the addition of our daughter Lily in 1982, so did our investment in making the house a true home. The sprawling backyard became a wonderland of play equipment, garden beds, and eventually a gazebo where we hosted countless summer gatherings. Leo's career as a cardiologist at Memorial Hospital flourished alongside our home renovations. Despite his demanding schedule, he always made time for family dinners at our massive oak dining table, a wedding gift from my parents that had witnessed everything from children's birthday parties to serious family discussions. "This table," Leo would often say, tapping its sturdy surface, "is the heart of our home. It's where we come together, no matter what else is happening in our lives." My own career as an elementary school librarian allowed me to share my love of literature with generations of children while still being present for Jensen and Lily's after-school activities. Our home frequently hosted book clubs, study groups, and neighborhood children drawn to our extensive collection of novels and comfortable reading nooks. As the children grew, the house evolved with us. The basement, yes, the same basement I would later inhabit, was transformed into a rec room where teenagers gathered for movie nights and board games under our distant but watchful supervision. The third-floor attic became a quiet study where Jensen prepared for college applications. The sunroom off the kitchen turned into my reading sanctuary after the children left home. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. When Leo and I reached our empty nest years, we considered downsizing, briefly, but the thought of leaving our meticulously restored home felt impossible. "This house is more than wood and plaster," Leo said. "It's the physical manifestation of our life together." Instead of moving, we focused on updating certain aspects, making the bathrooms more accessible, installing better heating and cooling systems, ensuring the home would serve us well into our golden years. Our planning seemed prescient when Leo was diagnosed with congestive heart failure at 68. The cruel irony of a cardiologist facing his own heart disease wasn't lost on either of us. "I've seen enough patients through this to know what's coming," he told me one evening as we sat in the garden. "Promise me you'll keep living fully, Alicia. This house should continue to hold joy, not become a mausoleum." Leo's decline was gradual. For 3 years, we adjusted to new limitations, transforming the formal dining room into a main-floor bedroom when stairs became too challenging. Friends from the hospital regularly visited, filling our home with medical discussions that shifted from professional to personal. Through it all, I was his primary caregiver, learning to manage medications, assist with daily tasks, and eventually coordinate with hospice. Jensen visited when he could, flying in from Chicago, where he'd established himself as a financial analyst. His wife, Tory, always impeccably dressed and somewhat formal, would accompany him, though she often seemed uncomfortable in the presence of illness. Their visits were brief but meaningful, with Jensen sitting beside his father's bed, recounting childhood memories while Tory usually found reasons to busy herself in other rooms. "She's never had to face mortality up close," Leo observed after one such visit. "Not everyone can look it in the eye without flinching." When Leo passed away peacefully in our home, surrounded by the craftsmanship we had lovingly restored together, I felt a profound loss but also gratitude for our shared journey. The funeral was beautiful, attended by colleagues, former patients, neighbors, and friends who filled the house afterward, each room echoing with stories and remembrances. In those early months of widowhood, the house became both comfort and challenge. Every corner held memories, yet the maintenance fell solely to me now. Still, I established new routines, joined a widow's support group, and gradually found a different rhythm to my days. I began volunteering at the library again, hosted my book club monthly, and tended the garden with the same care Leo and I had always shared. Jensen and Tory's visits became more regular after Leo's passing, though they rarely stayed in the house, preferring nearby hotels despite my protests about empty bedrooms going unused. They would arrive for Sunday brunches or holiday gatherings, with Tory often casting appraising glances around the rooms, as if mentally cataloging items of value. "Have you thought about what's next, Mom?" Jensen would ask during these visits, his financial analyst mind clearly concerned with practical matters. "This is a lot of house for one person to manage." "I'm managing just fine," I would reply, perhaps with more defensiveness than necessary. "This is my home, Jensen. Leo and I built our lives here." It was during one such visit, about 18 months after Leo's passing, that I experienced the fall that would ultimately change everything. Nothing dramatic, simply a missed step while carrying laundry upstairs, resulting in a fractured hip and a temporary loss of independence. The hospital stay was brief, followed by 2 weeks in a rehabilitation facility. When discharge planning began, Jensen announced that he and Tory had figured everything out. "You'll come home with us to Chicago," he explained at my bedside, Tory nodding beside him. "We've already looked into assisted living facilities near our house." "Absolutely not," I replied, surprising both of them with my firmness. "I'm returning to my home. I've already arranged for home health services and physical therapy." What followed was a tense negotiation that ended with what seemed like a reasonable compromise. Jensen and Tory would temporarily move into my house to help during my recovery. I would have the support I needed, and they would ensure my safety, while respecting my wish to remain in my home. "It's the perfect solution," Jensen insisted, relief evident in his voice. Just until you're back on your feet, Mom. How quickly perfect solutions can transform into something entirely different. Looking back now, I realize that the moment I agreed to their help was the moment I began to lose control of my own narrative, though I couldn't have known then how literally I would end up beneath their feet. The transition began innocuously. Enough. Jensen and Tory arrived at my home 2 days before my discharge from rehab, bringing suitcases and Tory's beloved Himalayan cat, Duchess, despite my well-known allergies. "We'll keep her upstairs," Tory assured me with a dismissive wave. "You won't even know she's here." My return home should have been joyful, a milestone in my recovery, but instead felt oddly muted. The house smelled different, a combination of Tory's expensive perfume and unfamiliar cleaning products that had replaced my natural lemon oil furniture polish. Small changes were immediately apparent. My hand-knit throw pillows had been replaced with sleek geometric designs. The refrigerator no longer held my carefully organized containers, but was filled with prepackaged meals and protein shakes. "We thought it would be easier for everyone if we streamlined things a bit," Jensen explained when he noticed my confusion. Tory read that removing clutter is important for preventing falls in older adults. I bit back the observation that my home had never been cluttered, merely lived in and personal. Instead, I thanked them for their thoughtfulness, reminding myself that this was temporary, a brief accommodation while I regained my strength. The first significant shift came 3 days later when I attempted to prepare breakfast in my own kitchen. "Mom, what are you doing?" Jensen appeared in the doorway, concern etched on his face. "You shouldn't be standing so long. Let Tory handle the meals." "I'm perfectly capable of making my own toast and tea," I replied, carefully steadying myself. "With my walker." The physical therapist actually encouraged me to resume normal activities gradually. "But not kitchen work," Tory interjected, gliding into the room in her silk pajamas. "There are too many hazards. Hot surfaces, sharp objects. What if you fell again? Jensen would never forgive himself." The conversation ended with me seated at my own table, watching Tory prepare a breakfast I hadn't asked for, in a kitchen I'd designed and managed for decades. It was the first of many small surrenders. As days turned into weeks, a pattern emerged. My suggestions were countered with concerns about safety. My preferences were overruled by what's best for my recovery. My routines were replaced by structures Jensen and Tory deemed more efficient. My doctor's appointments, once private conversations, now included Tory, who spoke about me in the third person as if I weren't present. "She's been experiencing some confusion," she told my physician during one visit, while I sat right beside her. "Yesterday she couldn't remember where we'd put her gardening magazines." I hadn't been confused, merely unable to locate items that had been moved without my knowledge. But the seed was planted. Perhaps Alicia was becoming forgetful. Perhaps Alicia needed more oversight than originally thought. 6 weeks into my recovery, I was walking well with a cane and managing stairs carefully but successfully. According to my physical therapist, I was exceeding expectations for someone my age. I began making gentle suggestions about Jensen and Tory returning to their lives in Chicago. "There's no rush," Jensen would say, his expression clouding slightly. "We've arranged to work remotely for as long as necessary." Then came the conversation that crystallized the shifting power dynamics in my home. I found Jensen and Tory in the living room one evening, spreadsheets spread across the coffee table that Leo had lovingly restored decades ago. "What's all this?" I asked, lowering myself carefully into my favorite armchair, the one that had mysteriously migrated from its usual spot by the window to a corner partially behind the sofa. "Just some long-term planning," Jensen replied vaguely, gathering papers together. Tory was less discreet. "We're looking at the financial implications of various arrangements," she said, her tone suggesting she was discussing an investment property rather than my home. "The Chicago market is so strong right now that we're considering whether it makes sense to sell our condo while we're helping you here." "Selling your condo?" I repeated, trying to process what this implied. But you've always loved city living. Priorities. Change, Jensen said, giving Tory a look I couldn't quite interpret. We're thinking more about family these days. 2 days later, I overheard Tory on the phone in what had been my sewing room but was now her home office. The door was ajar, and her voice carried clearly as I passed in the hallway. The location is perfect. Best school district in the state, she was saying to someone. The house needs updating, of course. Everything screams 1970s, but the square footage and lot size are exceptional. Once we renovate, the property value will skyrocket. I stood frozen outside the door, my cane suddenly necessary for emotional rather than physical support. She was discussing my home, Leo's and my home, as if it were an investment property already in their possession. That same week, I discovered my photo albums had been removed from the built-in bookshelves in the den and replaced with Tory's collection of art books and minimalist sculptures. When I inquired about their whereabouts, Jensen explained they'd been temporarily relocated to create a more functional workspace. They're just in the storage closet, Mom. We didn't throw anything away, he assured me, missing entirely that the issue wasn't about disposal, but displacement. Both of my belongings and my authority in my own home. The basement suggestion came exactly 2 months after my return from rehab, presented as a thoughtful solution rather than the demotion it truly was. Mom, we've been thinking, Jensen began over dinner one evening. These stairs are still challenging for you, and the master bedroom is so far from the main bathroom. We've had a wonderful idea, Tory continued enthusiastically. The basement could be converted into a perfect mother-in-law suite. 1 level, no stairs to navigate, and we could add some nice touches to make it comfortable. The basement, I echoed, thinking of the space that, while finished, had always been a utility and recreation area rather than living quarters. But my bedroom is upstairs. Exactly, Jensen said, his tone suggesting I'd made his point for him. Upstairs, down a long hallway, far from help if you needed it. This would be much safer. We've already spoken with a contractor, Tory added, reaching for her phone to show me concept images of generic basement renovations. Nothing too extensive, just converting the laundry area into a private bathroom, adding better lighting, maybe some built-ins for your personal things. They had planned this, discussed it, contacted professionals, all without a single conversation with me. The realization sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with my physical condition. I appreciate the thought, I said carefully, but I'm quite attached to my bedroom. Leo and I shared that room for 45 years. Jensen's expression softened with practiced sympathy. Mom, I understand, but attachment to spaces isn't as important as your safety. Dad would want you to be practical about this. The invocation of Leo's wishes, as interpreted by Jensen, became a common tactic in the days that followed. Dad would want you to be safe, and Dad wouldn't want you to struggle, became refrains that were difficult to counter without seeming irrational or sentimental. 3 weeks later, contractors arrived to begin the basement conversion. My protests had been gently but firmly dismissed, my alternatives countered with concern for my well-being. My emotional attachment to my bedroom characterized as an understandable but impractical nostalgia that needed to be overcome for my own good. And so began my gradual descent, literally and figuratively, from homeowner to basement occupant, from family matriarch to ward, from Alicia Reynolds to Jensen's mother, who needed special accommodations and constant oversight. Each step downward on the basement stairs represented another small piece of my autonomy surrendered, another aspect of my identity diminished. What Jensen and Tory failed to realize, what became increasingly clear to me as I watched my living space shrink and my voice in household decisions fade, was that physical frailty does not equate to diminished personhood. My hip was healing, my resolve was strengthening. And beneath the acquiescent exterior I presented, a plan was beginning to form. The basement transformation took 3 weeks, during which I was relegated to the guest bedroom on the main floor. The contractors arrived each morning at 8, their heavy footsteps and drilling reverberating through the house as they converted my storage area into what Tory enthusiastically called my new apartment. I watched from the sidelines as design decisions were made without my input. The warm, honey-colored paint I'd suggested was dismissed in favor of a more modern gray that Tory insisted would brighten the space. The vintage brass light fixtures I'd hoped to incorporate, remnants from our original restoration, were replaced with recessed lighting that cast a clinical glow over everything. "It's all about creating a safe, functional space," Jensen explained when I expressed disappointment about these choices. "Aesthetics are secondary at this point in life." At this point in life. The phrase stung with its underlying assumption that at 73, I should no longer care about beauty or personal expression. That function alone should satisfy me. Leo, who had insisted on hand-carved details for our kitchen cabinets, well into his 60s, would have scoffed at such a notion. The basement was completed on a Tuesday in late October. Jensen guided me down the stairs with ceremonial flourish, one hand on my elbow, though I no longer needed such support. Tory followed behind, filming the grand reveal on her phone as if we were participants in a home renovation show. "What do why?" "You think?" Jensen asked, gesturing broadly at the transformed space. I looked around at the standardized, senior-friendly features: grab bars beside the toilet, a shower seat in the new bathroom, a hospital-style bed with rails that could be raised if needed. The concrete walls had been dry-walled and painted that ubiquitous gray. New vinyl flooring that imitated hardwood covered the floor. A small kitchenette with a microwave and mini refrigerator occupied one corner, a half-hearted nod to independence that actually emphasized its limitations. It was clean, functional, and utterly devoid of character. A space designed for a generic elderly person rather than Alicia Reynolds, former librarian, gardener, and co-restorer of a historic Victorian home. "It's very efficient," I managed, trying to find something positive to say for Jensen's benefit. His expression fell slightly at my muted response. "Mom, this is top-of-the-line senior living design," he said, his tone carrying a hint of the impatience that had become increasingly common in our interactions. "The contractor specializes in aging-in-place renovations. I'm sure it will be very practical," I conceded, running my hand over the laminate countertop of the kitchenette, a poor substitute for the marble surfaces upstairs that Leo and I had saved for years to install. "Practical and safe," Tory emphasized, still filming my reaction. "That's what matters at this stage." That evening, Jensen and a reluctant Thomas, my 16-year-old grandson who had been dropped off for the weekend by my daughter Lily, moved my belongings downstairs. I watched from the basement as boxes containing the carefully curated items deemed necessary were carried down. My extensive book collection had been culled to a single bookshelf's worth. My clothing reduced to practical options that required minimal ironing or care. My jewelry limited to a few everyday pieces, rather than the full collection that included family heirlooms and Leo's thoughtful gifts from 45 years of marriage. As the boxes accumulated in my new apartment, I couldn't help but notice what was missing. My watercolor supplies, my gardening journals, the antique writing desk that had been my grandmother's. When I inquired about these items, Jensen looked momentarily uncomfortable. "We've had to make some decisions about space allocation," he explained. "The basement only has so much square footage, and we needed to prioritize essentials." "My painting supplies are essential to me," I pointed out quietly. "Mom, when was the last time you actually painted?" he asked, not unkindly, but with the air of someone making an irrefutable point. "Before your fall, even?" The truth was I hadn't painted in months. Grief over Leo's passing had dulled my creative impulses for a time. But I had been feeling the familiar urge returning, had even been planning to set up my supplies in the sunroom again. Now that possibility seemed to be slipping away along with so much else. "We can bring them down if you really want," Jensen conceded. "But I thought we agreed to reduce clutter for safety reasons." I didn't recall agreeing to any such thing, but I was learning to choose my battles carefully. "Perhaps later," I said, making a mental note to follow up once I was more settled. That first night in the basement was the hardest. After Jensen and Tory retired upstairs, to my bedroom, I couldn't help but note, I sat on the edge of the new bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of my new reality. The hum of the dehumidifier they'd installed in the corner, the faint thudding of footsteps overhead, the occasional creak of what had once been my bed frame as its new occupants settled in for the night. The basement wasn't cold. They'd installed sufficient heating, but it felt cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. The small window near the ceiling offered a view of nothing but darkness at night and, in daylight, a ground-level perspective of the driveway where Tori's SUV was typically parked. I reached for the framed photograph of Leo that I'd insisted on bringing downstairs, one taken on our 40th anniversary, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled at me across our dining room table. What would he say if he could see me now, relegated to the basement of the home we'd lovingly restored together? The home where we'd raised our children, celebrated countless milestones, and ultimately said our final goodbyes? Tears threatened, but I blinked them back. Leo wouldn't have wallowed in self-pity, and neither would I. He would have assessed the situation clearly and developed a plan. Strategy, not surrender, had been his motto during difficult hospital board meetings and professional challenges. Sleep came fitfully that night, disturbed by the unfamiliar surroundings and the growing weight of realization about what was happening. This temporary arrangement to help with my recovery had evolved into something else entirely, a restructuring of my life without my consent. The breaking point came exactly 17 days after my relocation to the basement. I had been making efforts to adapt, to find small ways to assert my preferences while avoiding direct confrontation. I'd established a routine of reading in the garden each morning, weather permitting, and had convinced Jensen to bring down at least some of my watercolor supplies to see if I might use them. That particular morning, I emerged from the basement to find Tory directing two women I didn't recognize as they wrapped my dining room furniture in moving blankets. My dining room table, the one where Leo and I had hosted 45 Thanksgiving dinners, where our children had completed homework, where we'd played board games during power outages, was being dismantled by strangers. "What's happening here?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Tory turned, momentarily startled by my presence. "Oh, Alicia, I thought you were still downstairs." She gestured to the women. "You can pause for a moment, ladies." "Why is my dining room set being wrapped up?" I asked, gripping my cane more firmly. "We're putting it in storage," Tory explained, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. "The new dining set will be delivered this afternoon. I showed Jensen options last week, and we finally decided on a beautiful glass and chrome table that will really open up the space." I stared at her, momentarily speechless. "You're replacing my dining room table? Without discussing it with me?" Tory's expression shifted to one I recognized well, the patient, slightly condescending look she reserved for explaining things to someone she considered intellectually diminished. "Alicia, we discussed modernizing several areas of the house. Remember? The dining room was definitely on the list." "We never discussed replacing my table," I said firmly. "That table was a wedding gift from my parents. Leo and I have shared every important family meal at that table for 45 years. Jensen appeared from the kitchen, alerted by the tension in my voice. "Mom, what's wrong?" "Your wife is removing my dining room table without my knowledge or consent," I said, turning to him. "My table, Jensen. The one your father and I cherished." "We're not getting rid of it," Jensen said placatingly. "It's just going into storage. The new table will be much more practical, smaller, easier to clean, no sharp corners if you happen to fall." "I'm not going to fall into my dining room table. I said, hearing the absurdity of the statement even as I spoke it. And if this is still my home, major furniture decisions should include me. A look passed between Jensen and Tory, quick but unmistakable, that sent a chill through me. It was a look of shared understanding, of a conversation they'd already had about how to handle this very situation. "Of course it's your home, Mom," Jensen said, his tone carefully measured. "We're just trying to make improvements that benefit everyone." "Everyone? Or you and Tory?" I asked, the words escaping before I could temper them. There was a moment of tense silence before Tory spoke again. "I think you're getting upset over nothing, Alicia. It's just furniture. The move to the basement has been an adjustment. We understand that. But these emotional attachments to objects aren't healthy." It wasn't about the table. Not really. It was about what the table represented. My history, my agency, my position within my own home. As I stood there, watching strangers handle one of my most cherished possessions, something crystallized within me. This wasn't a temporary arrangement to help with my recovery. This was a quiet, systematic erasure of my presence from the main floors of my own home. I turned and made my way back to the basement without another word, my mind suddenly, startlingly clear. This was the moment when acceptance transformed into action, when patience gave way to purpose. As I descended those stairs, I wasn't retreating. I was strategizing. I didn't sleep that night. The new dining set had been delivered and assembled by evening, a cold, modernist affair of glass and chrome that looked entirely out of place beneath the Victorian chandelier Leo and I had discovered at an estate sale in 1983. From my basement window, I had watched the delivery truck take away what Tory deemed excess furniture to a storage facility I hadn't chosen or even been told the location of. Sitting on the edge of my bed, I reached for Leo's medical bag, the worn leather one he'd carried through 30 years of hospital rounds. Inside, tucked beneath the stethoscope I couldn't bear to part with, was the small fireproof box containing our most important documents. I spread them across the bed methodically, as if preparing for surgery. Our will, drafted 5 years ago, was straightforward. Everything was to be divided equally between Jensen and Lily upon my death. The house specifically was mentioned as an asset to be sold, with proceeds split between our children, unless one wished to purchase the other's share at market value. What the will didn't specify, what Jensen and Tory seemed to have conveniently assumed, was any obligation for me to remain in this house until my death, particularly under such diminished circumstances. The property deed was next, still solely in my name as Leo, and I had never felt the need to change it after his passing. I ran my fingers over the embossed seal, remembering the day we'd signed the original paperwork, young and optimistic about the future we would build within these walls. Then came our financial records, my teacher's pension, Leo's substantial life insurance policy that had been invested wisely, our savings and stock portfolio. Conservative living and careful planning had left me in a considerably better financial position than my children realized. Jensen, with his financial analyst background, had made certain assumptions about my circumstances, but he'd never actually seen the full picture. Leo had been insistent about maintaining some financial privacy even with family. Everyone should have resources that are theirs alone, he'd told me more than once. It's not about trust, it's about independence. As dawn began to filter through my small basement window, I reached for my cell phone and made a list of calls I would make once the business day began. First to Megan, my friend in real estate, then to Aaron, my attorney, finally to Alan, our financial advisor who had helped manage our investments since Leo's passing. What I was contemplating wasn't merely a reaction to the dining room table, or even to my basement relegation. It was a recognition that the path forward required a fundamental recalibration of my relationship with my son and daughter-in-law, and perhaps with my understanding of myself. My hand trembled slightly as I wrote out my thoughts in the journal I'd kept since Leo's diagnosis. The physical act of writing had always helped clarify my thinking, and I needed absolute clarity now. I am not merely Leo's widow, or Jensen's mother, or Lily's mother, or Wren's grandmother. I am Alicia Reynolds, still capable, still deserving of dignity and agency. The fracture has healed. My mind is sound. My finances are secure. There is no reason I should be living in a basement, watching my life's treasures and memories be systematically removed without my consent. What would Leo say if he could see me now? He who insisted I learn to change the furnace filter and understand our investments and never sign anything without reading it first? He would be disappointed, not in Jensen, but in me for allowing this situation to progress so far without resistance. The house grew quiet upstairs as Jensen and Tory prepared for their day. I heard the familiar routine: shower running, coffee, Maker gurgling, Tory's heels clicking across the kitchen floor. The sound of the garage door opening and closing signaled their departure. Jensen to the local office space he'd rented for remote work, Tory to her yoga class, followed by lunch with new friends she'd made in the neighborhood. Once I was certain they were gone, I made my way upstairs, feeling like a visitor in what had once been unquestionably my domain. In the 2 months since Jensen and Tory had arrived to help with my recovery, the house had been transformed. My colorful Persian rugs had been replaced with trendy jute alternatives. My comfortable, well-worn furniture swapped for sleek, uncomfortable pieces that prioritized appearance over function. My extensive houseplant collection, some specimens dating back decades, reduced to a few carefully placed succulents in geometric containers. I wandered from room to room, cataloging the changes with growing resolution. In my former bedroom, now, Jensen and Tory's master suite, the walls had been repainted from the warm terracotta Leo and I had chosen to a stark white. The reading nook where I'd spent countless evenings now housed Tory's exercise equipment. The bathroom Leo and I had carefully updated with age-friendly features 5 years earlier had been completely gutted and replaced with a spa-like shower and floating vanity that, ironically, would be far less practical for aging residents. Most telling was what had vanished entirely. Photographs of Leo and me from the hallway walls, replaced with abstract prints. The collection of first-edition children's books I'd acquired during my library career, now nowhere to be seen. The antique clock that had been Leo's grandfather's, which had stood on our mantel for decades. It wasn't just renovation, it was erasure. Not just of things, but of history. Of me. I returned to the dining room and stood for a long moment, staring at the alien glass table that now dominated the space where so many family memories had been created. Without fully intending to, I found myself speaking aloud to the empty room. This isn't right, Leo, and I'm not going to allow it anymore. My voice, surprisingly steady, broke the silence of the house. The sound of it, confident, determined, strengthened my resolve. This was no longer about hurt feelings or even the indignity of basement living. This was about reclaiming my life and my right to determine its course. By 10 o'clock, I was dressed in my best outfit, a navy blue dress I'd worn to the hospital fundraising gala the year before Leo's passing, and seated at my small basement table with my phone and documents arranged before me. I took a deep breath and made the first call. Megan? It's Alicia Reynolds. I need to know what my house is worth in today's market and how quickly it could be sold. My friend's surprise was evident in her voice. You're beautiful Victorian? Alicia, are you? Sure. I thought you planned to stay there forever. Plans change, I replied simply. Sometimes they're changed for us, and sometimes we change them ourselves. This is the latter. After answering her concerned questions with as much detail as felt necessary, I ended the call with a request for absolute discretion. I'd prefer Jensen not hear about this from anyone but me, when the time is right. My second call was to Aaron, my attorney. I need to understand my options, I explained after exchanging pleasantries, particularly regarding the sale of my home and the establishment of new living arrangements of my choosing. Aaron's legal mind immediately grasped what I was and wasn't saying. "I assume there are some family dynamics at play here?" she asked cautiously. "You could say that," I acknowledged. "But the essential fact is that I own my home outright. I am mentally competent, and I wish to sell it. I want to confirm that there are no legal impediments to doing so." "None whatsoever," she assured me. "As the sole owner on the deed, you have complete authority to sell the property. However, if you have anyone living with you currently—" "My son and daughter-in-law are staying with me temporarily," I said, choosing my words carefully. "They have their own home in Chicago." "I see," Aaron replied, and I could hear her making notes. "In that case, I'd recommend documenting the temporary nature of their residence. We wouldn't want any complications regarding tenancy rights." My final call was to Alan, who managed our investment portfolio. "I'm considering purchasing a condominium," I explained after confirming that my finances remained in excellent shape. "Something single-level, in a community with amenities. I'd like to understand what price range would be prudent. Based on your current portfolio and projected income streams, you're in an extremely strong position," Alan assured me, "especially if you're planning to use proceeds from selling your current home." By noon, I had preliminary answers to my most pressing questions. My house was worth considerably more than I'd imagined in the current market. I could legally sell it without any input from Jensen or Tory. My financial position would easily support a very comfortable downsizing to a property of my choosing. I returned the documents to Leo's medical bag and placed it carefully in its hiding spot. Then I sat at my small desk, opened my journal again, and began to outline exactly what would happen next. This wasn't an impulsive reaction or an emotional response to hurt feelings. This was a carefully considered reclamation of my autonomy. As a tear slipped down my cheek, part grief for what had been lost, part determination for what would come, I made a promise to myself and to Leo's memory. I would not spend another season in this basement. And when I left, it would be entirely on my terms. The art of strategic action requires patience, preparation, and, perhaps most critically, the appearance of acceptance. In the week following my decision, I maintained what Jensen and Tory surely interpreted as resigned adaptation to my new circumstances. I emerged from the basement at predictable intervals, expressed mild preferences rather than objections when asked about household matters, and generally played the role they had cast for me, the aging mother who required management rather than partnership. Behind this careful facade, however, I was methodically executing a plan that would fundamentally alter our family dynamics. My first strategic meeting was with Megan at her real estate office, scheduled during what had become Tori's regular Thursday afternoon spa appointment. I'd mentioned to Jensen that I was meeting my widow's support group, a plausible excuse that required no elaboration, as he had shown little interest in my emotional processing of Leo's loss. Megan greeted me with a warm hug and concerned eyes. "I've pulled comparable sales for the past 6 months," she said, guiding me to a conference room where folders were already arranged on the table. "But before we get into numbers, Alicia, are you absolutely certain about this? You and Leo restored that house room by room?" "The house isn't just rooms, Megan," I replied, settling into a chair that, unlike my basement furniture, didn't prioritize ease of rising over comfort. "It's memories, history, and identity. And that's precisely why I can't stay and watch it be systematically erased and replaced." I explained the situation as objectively as possible. The basement relocation, the furniture replacements, the subtle but persistent questioning of my competence. Megan listened without interruption, her expression shifting from concern to indignation. I don't even know what to call it," she said finally. "Elder displacement? Inheritance impatience? I call it a profound misunderstanding of who I still am," I said, opening the folder she'd prepared. "Now tell me about the market." The numbers were startling. Our neighborhood had become one of the most desirable in the city over the decades, with historic homes commanding premium prices. Properties like mine, larger Victorian homes with original features intact, were particularly sought after by wealthy professionals wanting character along with proximity to downtown. You could list at $850,000 and likely receive multiple offers above asking, Megan advised. The original woodwork, stained glass, and period details you and Leo preserved are exactly what buyers in this bracket are seeking. The figure momentarily took my breath away. We'd purchased the house for $78,000 in 1975, considered a risky investment at the time in a transitioning neighborhood. The thought of what Leo would say about such a return on our investment brought a smile to my face. How quickly could we move on this? I asked, turning to the logistics page in Megan's presentation. If you want to maximize value, I'd recommend some strategic preparation, professional photos, minor touch-ups, proper staging, she explained. But given current market conditions, we could have it listed within 2 weeks and potentially under contract within days of listing. 2 weeks. The timeline both thrilled and terrified me. And how would showings work with my current living situation? Megan tapped her pen thoughtfully. Typically, occupants are asked to leave during showings, given the circumstances that might actually be advantageous. Jensen and Tory would need to make themselves scarce, just like you would. We spent the next hour developing a precise schedule. A home inspector would come Monday while Jensen and Tory were at work. A photographer would follow on Wednesday. The listing would go live the following Monday with an open house scheduled for the subsequent weekend. One more thing, I said as we concluded our meeting. I need your absolute discretion until I'm ready to inform Jensen, not just about the sale, about this entire conversation. Megan squeezed my hand. Of course. But, Alicia, they're going to know something's happening once inspectors and photographers start arriving. By then, I'll have a new address and a closing date, I replied, and they'll be dealing with a fait accompli rather than a negotiable intention. My next strategic move was finding my new home, one that would suit my needs without surrendering to the stereotypes others had imposed about what was appropriate for someone my age. I'd researched several options online and arranged to view 3 properties with a real estate agent from Megan's office who specialized in condominium sales. Alan, my financial advisor, had provided clear parameters for what I could afford based on my current assets, even before any proceeds from selling my house. The first property was in a designated senior living community, a well-appointed complex, with nurses on staff, daily activities, and dining facilities. The moment I walked in, I knew it wasn't right for me. Despite the quality amenities, there was an institutional undercurrent that reminded me too much of the rehabilitation facility I'd recently left. The residents I observed in common areas seemed passive, watched over rather than engaged with. The second property was a luxury downtown condominium with spectacular river views. While I appreciated the doorman, security features, and proximity to theaters and restaurants Leo and I had enjoyed, the sterile modernity of the space felt disconnected from who I was. I could too easily imagine Jensen and Tory nodding approvingly at such a choice, a tidy solution to the problem of my housing. The third property, however, spoke to me immediately. It was a garden-level condominium in a converted historic mansion, just 6 blocks from the city's art museum. The 3-unit building had been meticulously divided to preserve original features, crown moldings, hardwood floors, and bay windows, while incorporating modern conveniences. My potential unit offered 2 bedrooms, a study that could serve as my painting studio, and a private garden patio where I could continue my love of gardening on a manageable scale. Most importantly, it was part of a genuine neighborhood rather than an age-segregated community. As the agent showed me around, neighbors of various ages walked past. A young mother pushing a stroller, a middle-aged couple walking a dog, college students heading toward the nearby university campus. The owner is motivated to sell, the agent explained as we stood in what could become my new kitchen. Smaller than my current one, but thoughtfully designed with aging-in-place features that didn't scream elderly accommodation. He's already relocated for work and is carrying 2 mortgages. If you're interested, we could potentially close very quickly. I walked through the rooms again, trying to envision my remaining furniture in the space, imagining morning coffee on the garden, patio, walks to the museum where Leo and I had spent countless Sunday afternoons. What had begun as necessity, finding somewhere to live after selling my house, suddenly felt like opportunity, a fresh start in a space untainted by recent painful memories. "I'd like to make an offer," I said decisively. "Contingent on the sale of my home, but with an expedited timeline." By the end of that day, I had a signed purchase agreement for my new home, pending inspection, and the sale of my current house. The wheels were in motion, turning faster than even I had anticipated. The final piece of my strategic preparation involved practical logistics. I needed to identify which possessions were most important to me, what would come to my new home, and what could be left behind. This required careful planning, as I needed to inventory items without alerting Jensen and Tory to my intentions. I began with small actions, documenting the location of family heirlooms that had already been moved to storage, photographing items of sentimental value that remained in the house, making lists of what was in the basement with me versus what had been dispersed throughout the house. During my daily walks for exercise that Jensen and Tory encouraged, I actually went to a local bank and rented a safe deposit box where I secured my most important documents: the house deed, financial records, Leo's life insurance policy, and the purchase agreement for my new condominium. I arranged for a small storage unit nearby, and gradually, item by item, began relocating truly irreplaceable possessions when Jensen and Tory were out. Photograph albums they'd relegated to boxes, Leo's medical journals, the needlepoint pillows my grandmother had made that Tory had replaced with her modern alternatives. Each small action was a thread in the larger tapestry of my liberation. None would be noticeable individually, but together they were forming a path toward my independence. Throughout this period, I maintained my role in our daily family dynamics. I expressed appropriate gratitude when Jensen installed new grab bars in my basement bathroom. I nodded appreciatively when Tory explained her vision for renovating the kitchen, a renovation I knew would never happen under her supervision. I accepted their narrative that these changes were for my benefit while quietly preparing for a future they couldn't yet imagine. The home inspector arrived as scheduled, introduced as a maintenance specialist, checking on some issues with the basement humidity when Jensen called mid-morning to check on me. The photographer followed 2 days later, her presence explained as part of an insurance reassessment. By the end of that second week, everything was in place. My house was ready to be listed, my new condominium had passed inspection, my most important possessions were either with me in the basement or secured elsewhere, and I had a legal strategy in place for informing Jensen and Tory at precisely the right moment. The only piece missing was the courage to light the fuse on this carefully constructed plan. That evening, as I listened to Jensen and Tory discussing further renovation plans above my head, their voices muffled but their excitement clear, I took out Leo's wedding ring, which I wore on a chain around my neck. "I'm ready," I whispered, holding the ring tightly in my palm. "Watch me take care of myself, just like you always wanted." The Monday morning the listing went live dawned clear and bright. A perfect October day with just enough crispness in the air to suggest the changing of seasons. It seemed fitting. A day of transition, of boundaries between old and new being clearly drawn. Jensen and Tory had left early for their respective commitments. He for a virtual conference call that would occupy him until late afternoon. She for a day trip to visit a college friend in a neighboring town. Their absence was not a coincidence. I had carefully tracked their schedules for weeks, quietly noting patterns and commitments, waiting for the optimal moment. At precisely 9 a.m., Megan's assistant added my Victorian home to the real estate database. By 9:05, professional photographs, showcasing original woodwork, stained glass windows, and lovingly preserved period details were visible to potential buyers across the country. By 9:15, according to Megan's excited text message, the first showing request had already come in. I sat at my basement desk, my hands steady as I finalized the last pieces of my plan. First, I called Aaron to confirm all legal documents were in order. The power of attorney paperwork Jensen had you sign last month only covers medical decisions. In case of incapacity, she reassured me. It gives him no authority whatsoever over your property or financial decisions while you're competent, which you clearly are. Next, I called Alan to ensure my financial arrangements were properly structured. The proceeds from the house sale will go directly into your new account, he confirmed. I've set everything up as we discussed. Jensen won't have access to any of this information without your explicit permission. Finally, I called the manager at Riverbend Condominiums to confirm my move-in timeline. We can have your unit ready as early as next week, Mrs. Reynolds, she told me. Just let us know the exact date once your closing is finalized. With these assurances in place, I changed into the outfit I'd selected for this momentous day. Not the casual, washable clothes Tory had suggested were more practical for basement living, but a tailored blue dress Leo had always loved, my pearl earrings, and actual heels instead of the rubber-soled flats that had become my basement uniform. At 11:30, right on schedule, the doorbell rang. I made my way upstairs to answer it, moving with the confidence of a woman who owned the ground beneath her feet, which, legally and literally, I did. Mrs. Reynolds? A professional-looking couple stood on my porch beside Megan. I'm Dr. Sarah Chen, and this is my husband, Dr. William Chen. We're here about the house listing. Please, come in, I said, opening the door wide. I've been expecting you. The irony wasn't lost on me that the first people to tour my home were doctors, like Leo. There was something poetic about it, as if his presence was somehow guiding this transition. I led them through the rooms that had been my domain for nearly 5 decades, describing original features and renovation choices with the confidence of someone who had overseen each change personally. The Chens asked thoughtful questions, clearly appreciating the craftsmanship and history in a way Tory never had. Woodwork is extraordinary, Dr. William Chen remarked, running his hand along the banister Leo had spent an entire summer restoring. You just don't see this quality in new construction. My husband was passionate about preserving the home's character, I explained. Every project we undertook was designed to honor its history while making it livable for a modern family. As we completed the tour in the garden, the one area of the property Tory hadn't yet managed to update, Dr. Sarah Chen turned to me with obvious curiosity. Mrs. Reynolds, your home is absolutely beautiful. If you don't mind my asking, why? Are you selling? I smiled, the question anticipated and my answer well rehearsed. I'm not selling my past, I said simply. I'm purchasing my future. The Chen's offer arrived by late afternoon, significantly above asking price, with minimal contingencies and flexibility on the closing date. They had fallen in love with the house, Megan explained, particularly appreciating the careful preservation of historic elements. They included a personal letter describing their vision for raising their young daughter in a home with soul and character, words that resonated deeply with what Leo and I had always felt about our Victorian. I signed the acceptance documents in Megan's office, my signature steady and purposeful. There was no hesitation, no last-minute doubt, only the certainty that comes from making a decision that is entirely your own. Congratulations, Megan said, squeezing my hand as I passed the paperwork back to her. 30 days until closing, unless you want to expedite further. 30 days is perfect, I replied. Just enough time to finalize my new arrangements without rushing. The weight of the decision made, I now face the more immediate challenge, informing Jensen and Tory. I had decided against the element of complete surprise. Dropping such news during a casual dinner conversation seemed unnecessarily theatrical and potentially cruel. Instead, I had asked them to meet me at the house at 6 p.m., saying only that I needed to discuss something important with them. I arrived home first, taking a moment to center myself before their arrival. The house felt different already, less like a battleground and more like a vessel that had served its purpose in my life journey. I ran my hand along the dining room wall, thanking it silently for sheltering the family I loved through decades of growth and change. Jensen and Tory arrived together, their expressions wary as they found me waiting in the living room rather than the basement. "Mom, is everything okay?" Jensen asked, clearly scanning for signs of health emergencies or cognitive decline. The only reasons he could imagine for such a formal summons. "Everything is fine," I assured him, gesturing for them to sit. "Better than fine, actually. I've made some decisions about my future that I want to share with you." Tory glanced at Jensen, that familiar look of shared understanding passing between them. "We're always happy to help with planning," she offered, her tone suggesting she anticipated a conversation about assisted living or additional home modifications. "That's thoughtful, but my plans are already in motion," I said, maintaining a calm I had practiced for days. "I've sold the house." The silence that followed was profound, a vacuum of comprehension as they struggled to process my words. "You've... what?" Jensen finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sold the house," I repeated clearly. "The offer was accepted this afternoon. We close in 30 days. Tory's composure fractured first. "But you can't just... we live here now." "Temporarily," I corrected gently, while helping me recover from my hip fracture. A recovery that, I'm pleased to say, is complete. Jensen leaned forward, his financial analyst mind clearly racing to catch up with implications. "Mom, if you needed money, we could have discussed options. Selling the family home is a drastic step." "This isn't about money," I said. "It's about reclaiming my life on my terms. I've purchased a condominium near the art museum, single level, accessible, and entirely mine." "This is ridiculous," Tory interjected, color rising in her cheeks. "You can't possibly live alone again. What about your safety? What about our plans for..." She stopped herself abruptly, but the unspoken words hung in the air between us. Their plans. For my house. For their future. "I think," I said into the tense silence, "that's precisely the point." The weeks following my announcement unfolded in a symphony of reactions, some predictable, others surprising in their intensity. Jensen cycled through disbelief, anger, bargaining, and finally a reluctant acceptance that reminded me of the stages of grief. Tory's response was more consistently adversarial, her carefully cultivated image of concerned daughter-in-law dissolving into something more transparently self-interested. "You've been planning this behind our backs," she accused during a particularly tense dinner 3 days after my announcement. "While we've been caring for you, rearranging our entire lives for your benefit." I set down my fork, meeting her gaze directly. "Yes, I planned carefully, just as you planned my relocation to the basement, the removal of my furniture, and the renovation of my home, all without meaningful consultation with me." Jensen winced at the parallel I'd drawn. "That's not fair, Mom. We were trying to help. You. Were you?" I asked quietly. "Or were you helping yourselves to my home while I was still living in it?" This fundamental question, whether their actions had been motivated by concern or convenience, hung between us during those transitional weeks, rarely addressed directly but constantly present in every interaction. Practical matters necessitated continued communication despite the emotional tension. Jensen and Tory needed to find new living arrangements quickly, a challenge in the competitive housing market they had hoped to bypass by inheriting my home. I learned they had indeed sold their Chicago condo months earlier, a detail they had never shared with me, operating on the assumption that my house would eventually be theirs. We thought it made financial sense, Jensen explained when I discovered this through an inadvertent comment. Property values in this neighborhood are only increasing. I'm aware, I replied dryly. That's why the Chens offered $50,000 over asking price. The Chens became another point of contention. When they requested a second viewing to take measurements for furniture placement, Tory initially refused to leave the house. This is still our home for the next 3 weeks, she insisted. We shouldn't have to rearrange our schedule for these people. These people, I reminded her gently but firmly, are the new owners who have every right to prepare for their move. And it's still legally my home, not ours. Amid these tensions, I continued methodically preparing for my new life. I visited my condominium several times, taking measurements and planning furniture arrangements. I researched community resources in my new neighborhood, the library that offered book clubs for seniors, the community center with watercolor classes, the farmers' market held every Saturday within walking distance. I also reconnected with friends who had fallen away during my basement period, lunch with former teaching colleagues, coffee with my widow's support group, even a tentative dinner with Alan, my financial advisor, whose companionship I found unexpectedly enjoyable outside our professional relationship. Most significantly, I spent time with Lily and her son Ren when they visited from Seattle, deliberately arranging our meeting at a restaurant rather than the increasingly tense environment of the house. I explained my decision in terms of positive choice rather than family conflict. Dad always wanted me to enjoy this chapter of life, I told her, as Ren explored the restaurant's fish tank. This move feels like honoring that wish. Lily, who had always been more perceptive than her brother about family dynamics, squeezed my hand. Are things really that bad with Jensen and Tory? Not bad, I clarified. Just clarifying. They had one vision for my future. I have another. We're all adjusting to that reality. As moving day approached, the house gradually emptied, Jensen and Tory packing their possessions for temporary storage until they found a new home, the Chens stopping by with decorators and contractors to plan their own renovations, and me carefully selecting which pieces of my past would accompany me into my future. In those transitional spaces, boxes half-packed, rooms partially emptied, I found myself not mourning what I was leaving, but increasingly eager for what lay ahead. Each item I chose to bring represented not just a memory, but a conscious decision about who Alicia Reynolds was becoming in this new chapter. On a crisp November morning, exactly 28 days after signing the sale documents, I stood in the entryway of my condominium, surrounded by carefully selected furnishings from my previous life, arranged thoughtfully in their new home. Sunlight streamed through the bay windows, casting warm patterns across hardwood floors that, while not the ones Leo and I had laboriously restored, held their own historic charm. The moving process had been surprisingly painless. I had hired professional movers despite Jensen's insistence that he could handle it, recognizing that maintaining clear boundaries would be crucial during this transition. They had transported my curated collection of furniture, artwork, and personal items with efficiency and care, respecting my specific instructions about placement and handling. Now, watching the morning light illuminate my new space, I felt a profound sense of rightness. The condominium was smaller than my Victorian, certainly, but it enveloped me in a way the house had ceased to do once I'd been relegated to its margins. Here, every room was mine, every decision about decor and arrangement belonged to me alone, and every object had earned its place through deliberate choice rather than passive inheritance. My favorite reading chair, rescued from storage, where Jensen and Tory had relegated it, sat perfectly positioned by the bay window, Leo's medical bag resting on the small table beside it. The writing desk that had been my grandmother's occupied a place of honor in what would become my painting studio. The quilt Leo's mother had made for our wedding was draped across my new bed, connecting past to present without allowing it to overwhelm my future. I had been in my new home for exactly 3 days when the doorbell rang, announcing my first visitor. Opening the door revealed Jensen, looking somewhat lost without Tory beside him. "May I come in?" he asked, more tentative than I had seen him in years. I stepped aside to welcome him, watching as he took in my new surroundings with surprise evident on his face. Perhaps he had expected something institutional or depressingly sparse. Not this vibrant, personalized space that so clearly reflected my tastes and personality. "This is really nice, Mom," he finally said, genuine appreciation in his voice. "I didn't realize garden-level units could get such good light." "That was a priority for me," I replied, guiding him to the sitting area where I had prepared tea, anticipating his visit after our cautiously cordial exchanges at the closing 2 days earlier. He settled into a chair, his financial analyst's eyes clearly cataloging details, the quality of the renovation, the desirable neighborhood visible through my windows, the strategic downsizing that had maintained quality while eliminating excess. "You really thought this through," he observed, accepting the cup I offered. "I did," I confirmed. "Just as your father and I thought through every decision about the Victorian." Jensen winced slightly at the mention of Leo, perhaps finally recognizing how far his recent actions had diverged from his father's values. "About that," he began, setting his cup down carefully, "I owe you an apology. I got caught up in seeing the house as an asset, an inheritance, rather than as your home. I never stopped to consider how our changes were affecting you." The acknowledgement, while belated, was clearly sincere. Jensen had always struggled with admitting mistakes, even as a child. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means a lot to me." "Tory and I have found a house," he continued after a moment. "Smaller than we wanted, farther from the city center, but it's a start. She's still adjusting to the change in plans." I nodded, understanding the subtext. Tory's vision of inheriting a prestigious Victorian in a prime neighborhood had been shattered, and her adjustment would likely take longer than Jensen's. "And you?" I asked. "How are you adjusting?" He looked around my new home again, his expression softening. "I'm realizing that I underestimated you. Dad would say that was a serious mistake." "Your father," I said with a small smile, "always believed in my capacity to surprise people." As Jensen prepared to leave an hour later, he paused at the door. "Will you be okay here, Mom? Really okay?" I considered the question seriously, knowing he deserved an honest answer. "I'm more than okay, Jensen. For the first time since your father died, since before that, really, I feel fully present in my own life, not relegated to its edges or confined to its basement, but centered in it." He nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. "That's what Dad would have wanted for you." "Yes," I agreed, touching the wedding ring I still wore on a chain around my neck. "It's exactly what he would have wanted." Winter settled over the city, transforming my garden patio into a crystalline wonderland, and casting my new life in the soft, reflective glow that only freshly fallen snow can provide. 3 months had passed since my move. 3 months of discovery, adjustment, and gradual reclamation of aspects of myself that had been temporarily muted during my basement days. On this particular morning, I sat in my painting studio, brush in hand, working on a watercolor scene of the Victorian as I remembered it from better days. Not with nostalgia for the physical structure itself, but as an acknowledgement of what it had represented in the tapestry of my life story. As I added subtle shading to the wraparound porch where Leo and I had spent countless summer evenings, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this peaceful moment. The doorbell chimed, interrupting my thoughts. I set down my brush and made my way to the entrance, pleased to find Erin on my doorstep, portfolio in hand, and snowflakes dusting her dark coat. "Right on time," I greeted her. "Come in out of the cold." My attorney had become a regular visitor, Over the past months, our professional relationship evolving into a friendship built on mutual respect and shared experiences as women navigating complex family dynamics. "I've brought the final paperwork for your living trust," she explained, settling at my dining table where I'd prepared coffee and the cranberry scones she favored. "Once we sign these documents, everything will be structured exactly as you wanted." The trust was the culmination of months of careful planning, a comprehensive framework designed to protect my autonomy while providing transparently for both my children after my eventual passing. No more assumptions, no more unspoken expectations, no more imbalance in information. Jensen and Lily would each receive copies of the completed documents, understanding precisely what was established for their future, while recognizing unequivocally that my present remained under my control. "It feels like closing a circle," I observed as I signed the final page with a steady hand. "Creating clarity where there was once confusion." Aaron nodded, understanding the deeper implications beyond the legal formalities. "You've created something remarkable here, Alicia. Not just the trust, but this new chapter of your life." After she left with the executed documents, I returned to my painting, adding details to the garden where Leo had taught Jensen and Lily to identify different flowers, each brushstroke preserving memory while releasing attachment to the physical place itself. As the winter light shifted through my windows, I found myself contemplating the profound lessons of the past year. I had learned that dignity is not bestowed by others but claimed by oneself, sometimes against substantial resistance. The basement hadn't been merely a physical location, but a mindset that required rejection, a narrative about aging and dependence that I had temporarily accepted before finding the strength to write a different story. I had discovered that family, relationships, even those most precious to us, require boundaries to remain healthy. My love for Jensen hadn't diminished through this experience, but it had matured into something more honest, no longer shadowed by unspoken expectations or imbalances of power. Our weekly phone calls now contained genuine exchanges rather than veiled negotiations, and his recent visit with his son Thomas had unfolded with a warmth and respect that had been missing from our interactions for too long. Most importantly, I had come to understand that reinvention isn't limited by age, but expanded by experience. At 73, I wasn't merely existing in the diminishing shadow of my former life, but actively creating something new and authentically mine. My calendar now held watercolor classes on Tuesdays, book club meetings on Thursdays, and occasional dinners with Alan that had begun to take on the sweet, unhurried quality of courtship among those who have nothing to prove and all the time they need. The deepest wisdom, perhaps, was recognizing that Leo had prepared me for this journey long before either of us knew I would need to take it. His insistence on my financial literacy, his encouragement of my independence even within our partnership, his careful documentation of our affairs, all had been acts of love extending beyond his lifetime, ensuring I would have the tools to stand firmly on my own when necessary. As I added the final brushstrokes to my painting, not of the house as it had been when I left it, but as it had been at its best, I whispered words that had become something of a personal mantra. "The basement is where they put you only if you agree to stay there." Spring arrived with gentle insistence, coaxing crocuses through the soil in my garden patio, and washing the city in that particular quality of light that suggests renewal is not just possible, but inevitable. 1 year had passed since my fall, the seemingly minor event that had catalyzed such profound change in my life's direction. Now, on this mild April morning, I stood in my garden, trowel in hand, preparing the soil for the herbs and flowers I'd selected for my first season in this new space. The gardening was different here. Containers rather than expansive beds, strategic, choices about what could thrive in partial shade, adaptations for a smaller scale. Yet it brought the same satisfaction, the same connection to cycles of growth and transformation that had always centered me through life's challenges. As I worked, I heard the distinctive sound of my phone chiming with a video call. Brushing soil from my hands, I settled on my patio chair and answered to find Lily's face filling the screen, my grandson Ren visible beside her. "Hi, Mom. We're confirming our arrival time for next weekend," she said brightly. "The museum exhibition opens at noon on Saturday, so we thought we'd get in Friday evening if that still works for you." "Perfect," I replied, feeling that particular warmth that comes from family visits anticipated with joy rather than dread. "The guest room is all ready, and I've already purchased tickets for the exhibition." Lily and Ren's upcoming visit represented something significant. Their first stay in my new home, the beginning of fresh traditions and memories untainted by the tensions of the past year. We had planned carefully. The special exhibition of children's book illustrations that would interest all 3 generations, dinner with Jensen and Thomas one evening to celebrate Ren's birthday, and plenty of unstructured time simply to enjoy each other's company. After ending the call, I returned to my gardening with renewed purpose, considering how to arrange my patio seating to best accommodate the conversations I looked forward to sharing in this space as the weather warmed. The future stretched before me not as a diminishing path, but as an expanding one, filled with possibilities I was actively creating. The wisdom of age, I had discovered, came not from accepting limitations, but from recognizing which constraints were real and which were merely imposed by others' expectations. My body had indeed changed. I couldn't deny the occasional twinge in my hip when rain threatened, or the reading glasses now permanently attached to a chain around my neck. But these physical realities didn't define the boundaries of my life, any more than the concrete walls of that basement had truly contained my spirit. Later that afternoon, I met Alan for our weekly walk along the riverside path near my condominium. These walks had become a cherished ritual, a time for conversation that meandered as pleasantly as our footsteps along the water's edge. Today, he arrived carrying 2 paper cups of coffee and wearing the slightly nervous expression I'd come to find endearing. "I have something to ask you," he said as we settled on a bench overlooking the river. "The symphony is performing Dvořák next month, Leo's favorite if I remember correctly from our conversations. Would you consider attending with me? As a proper date?" The question hung between us, representing yet another threshold in this chapter of reinvention. Alan had been Leo's financial advisor and friend for decades. He understood the weight of that history and had never pressed for more than companionship until now. I thought of Leo, of the conversations we'd had during his final months, of his insistence that I find joy wherever it might present itself after he was gone. "I'd like that very much," I replied simply, watching relief and pleasure transform Alan's expression. As we continued our walk, discussing music and memories and possibilities, I felt profoundly grateful for the unexpected trajectory my life had taken. The basement experience, painful as it had been, had ultimately served as the catalyst for this renaissance, this reclamation of self that might never have occurred without that clarifying moment of recognizing how thoroughly I had been sidelined in my own story. Now, with each deliberate choice and each day lived fully present, I was writing new pages, not as an afterthought in someone else's narrative, but as the author of my own continuing adventure. The horizon before me was not a closing door, but an opening one, revealing vistas I was only beginning to explore. The truest liberation I had discovered wasn't just in leaving that basement, but in recognizing that I had always possessed the key. And that realization, perhaps, was the most valuable deed of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.